What's up everyone, thanks for joining me today. I'm Dan and thanks to Qbyte Interactive for the review code for Mists of Noyah on the Nintendo Switch. Mists of Noyah is a retro style adventure game that brings together elements of tower defense, survival, RPG, platforming and roguelike genres. The game is set in a world ravaged by corruption where players start in an abandoned fort that has been destroyed in an attack. Your goal is to rebuild the fort by finding the scattered inhabitants, gathering resources, and defending against waves of demonic creatures that assault the fort every full moon. One of the standout features of Mists of Noyah is its retro art style. The visuals are charming with a nostalgic appeal that harkens back to the classic games of the 16-bit era. The environments are diverse with over 10 biomes to explore, each with its own distinct aesthetic. The game's art direction successfully creates an immersive world filled with danger and mystery. The character sprites are well designed and the animation, while not groundbreaking, is smooth and fitting for the game's retro style. The background music and sound effects complement the visuals, adding to the overall atmosphere of the game. The soundtrack is reminiscent of old school RPGs with its melodic tunes setting the tone for exploration and combat. However, despite the visual and auditory appeal, the game's technical issues and convoluted systems often detract from the overall experience. Mists of Noyah is packed with a plethora of mechanics and systems including crafting, farming, building, enchanting and more. The game features 5 playable heroes, each with their own unique abilities and playstyles. There's also a day-night cycle that significantly impacts gameplay. During the day you gather resources and explore, while at night you must defend your fort from increasingly powerful waves of enemies. On paper, these mechanics offer a deep and engaging experience. However, in practice, the sheer number of systems can feel overwhelming, especially since they're not well explained. The game lacks a proper tutorial, leaving players to figure out most mechanics on their own. This steep learning curve can be frustrating, particularly for newcomers who might be unfamiliar with some of the genres Mists of Noyah draws from. The game's crafting system is robust, allowing players to forge weapons, cook food, brew potions and more. However, the process can be time consuming, which becomes a problem during the game's time-sensitive tower defense segments. Resource gathering is another essential part of the game, but it often feels like a grind. Upgrading your tools helps, but the pace at which you collect resources remains slow, which can detract from the overall enjoyment of the game. Combat in Mists of Noyah is straightforward with easy to learn controls that allows players to jump into the action quickly. However, the simplicity of the combat is both a strength and a weakness. While the controls are accessible, the combat can feel repetitive over time. The game attempts to add variety with different enemy types and the inclusion of dungeons, but these elements are not enough to keep the combat feeling fresh throughout the entire experience. Exploration is another key component of the game, with players venturing into different biomes to find resources and rescue inhabitants. The world is procedurally generated, which adds some replayability, but the level design can feel repetitive at times. The first few maps are recycled frequently, with only the enemy placements changing. This can lead to situations where players are ambushed or killed immediately upon entering a new area, which can feel unfair and frustrating. Unfortunately, Mists of Noyah is plagued by technical issues on the Nintendo Switch. Long loading times are a frequent annoyance, breaking the immersion and testing the player's patience. The game also suffers from various glitches, including random saving issues, black screens, and collision detection problems. These glitches can be game breaking, forcing players to restart the game or lose progress. One of the most frustrating bugs is the inactivity glitch, where the player character suddenly becomes unresponsive in combat. While this can sometimes be fixed by opening the inventory, it's still an issue that can disrupt the flow of the gameplay and not really one you should have to contend with. The controls themselves can also be inconsistent at times, with some buttons being overly sensitive while others are unresponsive. For example, the attack button may trigger multiple times with a single press, while the interact button might require several presses to work. Mists of Noyah is a game that tries to do too much and as a result ends up feeling like less than the sum of its parts. The game's retro art style and nostalgic soundtrack are its strongest features, but they are overshadowed by the overwhelming number of poorly explained systems, technical issues, and repetitive gameplay. The lack of a proper tutorial makes the steep learning curve even more daunting. The absence of multiplayer on the Switch version only adds to the game's shortcomings. For players who enjoy complex games with multiple layers of mechanics, Mists of Noyah might offer some appeal, especially once the initial learning curve is overcome. However, for most players, the game's flaws will likely outweigh its strengths. In its current state, Mists of Noyah feels more like a missed opportunity than a must-play title. With some polish and refinement, it could become a more enjoyable experience, but as it stands, it's a difficult game to recommend on the Nintendo Switch. Mists of Noyah is out now on the Nintendo eShop, priced at $8.99 in the UK and $9.99 in the US. Thanks as always for watching, hope you enjoyed the review, and until next time.